could have solved it for Ukraine? And what could have stopped this happening to Russia and Ukraine, or between Russia and Ukraine? If there was a president that wanted to be westward looking and join the EU, and would have been passionate enough about it and patriotic enough for his country, but not as far right or far into this as to completely sabotage the relationship with Russia and completely dismiss anything to do with Russia. If there was a president to have that kind of wisdom, to be able to build mutual, positive, lucrative relationships, both with Russia and the EU, who could have stood its ground, who could have stood his ground, and who could have stood up for Ukraine and for its interests, so as not to strike a deal with the EU at the risk of losing the relationship with Russia, and on the other hand not have a relationship with Russia conditioned by no relationship with the EU, and would have walked this golden middle ground, if you want. This could have been avoided if it was a president wise enough to say, NATO is a threat for you, Russia. I'm gonna take this seriously. I'm gonna take into account, and I'm going to sign the right agreements to keep Ukraine's neutrality. And given that there could be some security guarantees both on Russia's part and NATO part, if that there was that kind of wisdom within the system, I imagine that this would have avoided this situation altogether. It would have avoided this polarization, extreme polarization, where the far right groups get so extreme and so violent in their pursuit of sovereignty that they completely want to annihilate the Russian population and anything Russian. And that, or the other extreme, where Russia is so intent on having its claws onto the Ukrainian political arena and have so much to say, or so much say and involvement within this, because the threat of NATO is always like Damocles' sword hanging over its head. If this polarization would not have happened, the harmony and peace would have been, and freedom would have been more the characteristics of this relationship and the characteristics of these mediums or circumstances. So then Putin would not have felt the need to go so strong and defend to the extent of a military attack. Ukraine, on the other hand, would not have had the need to get NATO to train their military and up their force. That's the problem. When you don't have mutual positive relationships and respect for the sovereignty of another, for the boundaries of another, then you have to up your force. And in this situation, because any outside intervention, any promises that were made to Zelensky that we're gonna come in and help, and any thumbs up from the President Biden, that would have encouraged him to say, to stand on this extreme position that pushed Russia in such a way and created this mayhem. Who is winning in the end? Who is winning? NATO is winning because now it gets an excuse to insist that the contribution is paid by all the countries and maybe raise it. And from what I remember during Trump administration, there was a complaint that other countries are not paying the right contribution. Now they will have all an extra incentive because Russia is there and because they are under threat, and it might come after them. And that is a very good, scaremongering technique, even if Russia is definitely not coming for any European countries, including Ukraine. But, there's been enough of that to push and convince everyone to pay extra. The deputy secretary to the Secretary General has already talked about the need to develop extra infrastructure through Moldova and build the roads and new pipelines for gas. So they are already talking about all that. And of course, now that Ukraine is in ruins, who are gonna be the contractors to come in and help? Who's gonna inject these billions into the country to help rebuild it? Of course, it's gonna be the West, and of course, all this is gonna be under some form of aid, under some form of loans, coming again from the pockets of the taxpayers to help the developing world, to help aid this need. And again, this is very lucrative scheme for everyone that is involved in this. And of course, with the NATO developing, of course, there is more arms deployment and development, and those who work into those branches, of course, also have to gain. And we already know what a wonderful event this has been for the media, and how much the viewership grows, and all the other funds that will be distributed to any defense, intelligence, security systems and practices. Those are the ones that gain in the end. While Russia and Ukraine are suffering the consequences of this the hardest, and it will take years for them to build it back up. On the Russian side, the economy and how the repercussions of those sanctions in that regard, and on Ukraine, everything that has to do with the destruction and the economy that was already so down. So my hope is that, sounds probably as a cliche, that some lessons are learned, and that the animosity that has been built between these nations would somehow subsidize, and that there will be enough wisdom to understand that peace and harmony and forgiveness and understanding the benefit of it will prevail, and that these nations will be able to work together again and stay united for the future. Stay united, if not for anything else, at least for pragmatic reasons. Because when you live so close to each other, you have to be practical in in these choices. If ideologically you are different, you have to have at least working agreements that are pragmatic and practical for both sides, and that safety of the people is first and foremost guaranteed and protected, and that you are able to conduct things with regard to the other nation, the other country, proper boundaries and respect for that. But who has the foresight to see this? And who could have the wisdom to foresee this? Who is the visionary here? It's easier to look retrospectively. It's much more difficult to be able to look into the future and know what might happen. But this doesn't have to do with vision so much. It has to do with some common sense, respect for your neighbor, respect for the other, consideration for the other. Just like in human relationships. Let me know what your thoughts are about it.